Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and rejoining the show for our annual summer. Let's try to project what all the Vikings players are going to do. Ian Hartitz, formerly of PFF, now with Fantasy Life, Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life, which has taken off, Ian, and I'm very happy to see your success there. Very cool for you. And, we've got a lot to talk about. There's actually some players that we don't really know how to predict, and we're going to have to do some real intellectual fantasy work here to try to project the Minnesota Vikings in 2023. So what is up, man? How are you?
Good time joining the pod as always, man. Like you said, Andrew, what's it probably time 3 or 4 now? You come on my podcast a few times. Always a great day, be great. But yeah, with these Vikings, man, and one of the stats I've been pulling out all summer, Vikings, Seahawks, and Lions, those are the only 3 top 10 scoring offenses that also had a bottom 10 scoring defense last year. When you get that recipe, you tend to get a lot of these shootouts back and forth. Did the Vikings do enough on offense to make up for, potentially having a better real life defense this year? We'll find out, man, because at the end of the day, in fantasy land at least, we want as many shootouts as possible, as bad a defense as possible, so we just get as much fantasy-friendly volume as possible.
Folks, I've been wearing Oakleys now for a few weeks, and let me tell you, there is a reason that Justin Jefferson and a bunch of other football players wear these things. Because they are awesome. I've got the matte black Prism Sapphire polar sunglasses on, and I've been doing all sorts of summer things with them. I've been hitting golf balls in the water, jogging, playing basketball, getting sunburned, but my eyes are in good shape. I have been missing out on this experience for a long time. They are so comfortable. I can wear them all day and never get tired of having them on. Oakley is changing the game, and it's time for you to discover a whole new world of possibilities with your eyewear. They are suited for everyday eyewear with frames and lenses, allowing you to be an extension of yourself, an expression of your personality more than meets the eye. So make a sunglasses upgrade now at Oakley.com. Oakley offers Prism lens technology. What the heck is that, you ask? Well, I'm looking through it right now. It is a proprietary technology to Oakley and available for everyday settings as well. If you want to know more, and I know you do, go to Oakley.com and do your own research. And while you're at it, get yourself a pair of everyday glasses that will be sure to change your look for the better. When you wear Oakley, there really is more than meets the eye. Try it for yourself. I've worn sunglasses in the past, and I can assure you that Oakley is the best looking and best quality out there. So go on over to Oakley.com for more information today. Oakley, express your style and build a look that's made for you. Well, if you've looked at the Vikings schedule, there is a pretty good chance that there's going to be a lot of shootouts because they are playing all the teams that were in championship weekend last year. They're playing Mahomes. They're playing the Eagles again. I mean, there's a lot of good quarterbacks on this schedule, and I think that's going to make overall for a more difficult season this year. But fantasy-wise, that means that I think they're going to go into the fourth quarter needing to pass the ball still quite a bit. So I'll give you the choice. Do you want to talk about the very interesting running back situation or the very interesting wide receiver situation for the Vikings first?
We can go running backs, but real quick, just one note on Kirk Cousins, the, stable QB. 3 straight years, Matthew, as the QB 12 in fantasy points per game. That's just consistency right there. I thought that was pretty impressive. We got the, DJ Moore, 1,200 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like these just ridiculous statistical feats that end up happening time and time again. So credit to Kirk for keeping on, man. Like I know he hasn't, in terms of the contract the Vikings gave him, the playoff success and throwing the ball 3 yards on, 4th and 9 and all that. I understand we have quips there, but just in terms of, you don't need that many extra fingers outside of your 2 hands to count the number of quarterbacks better than Kirk. So credit to him there. Let's talk some running backs though, because my God, man, cannot go a day without hearing about this Dalvin Cook situation out here.
I know. And as we speak right now, they could be making a move with Dalvin Cook. It has been months of my life wondering when this is going to happen. It seems inevitable that he is not going to be a Minnesota Viking. So let's just go on that assumption so this podcast is not immediately blown up if he's moved. But if we go on the assumption that Dalvin Cook is not the running back of the Minnesota Vikings, and you look at Alexander Mattison, he has had such a small sample size of times where he's actually been the RB1 in games for the Vikings, because him as a put him in for a couple of plays here or there, he really hasn't been all that successful as a rotational back and hasn't really gotten many opportunities. But if you look at the games where he's a starter, he's routinely averaging 4 or 5 yards per carry and has been pretty successful. Clearly, they like him because they decided to bring him back at a decent price for somebody that is unproven. But they also have this other stable of running backs, including Ty Chandler, Kene Nwangwu, who we talked about last offseason. Maybe we were just a year too early, and then they draft Wayne McBride as well. From a fantasy perspective, how are you looking at Alexander Mattison?
Well, in the past, it hasn't quite been as easy as scratching off Dalvin Cook's name and just putting Madison in there when Dalvin has missed time, usually with that shoulder injury. But it hasn't been that far removed, man, because at least, before Kevin O'Connell got there, we not unfortunately, I always want to see guys play 17 games, but we haven't seen an instance of Madison being the lead back under O'Connell. But previously to that, when you looked at it, man, 6 different times he got that spot start, and 6 different times he was just getting force fed the ball, man. We had one bust in there when they got behind in the first half, and then we actually had at that point in time Amir Abdullah coming in and taking the pass down work. But otherwise, man, just in terms of their weekly RB finish, 4th, 7th, 6th, 8th, and 13th in 5 of those other games. So now he was getting force fed the football here. 4 of those games he had over 20 carries, and to your point, he was being a little bit more efficient with those. But man, year 1, year 2, Alexander Mattison was making a lot more out of those touches than what we've seen from him over these past 2 years. I know yards per carry isn't the be-all, end-all stat for evaluating running backs. I really like it to start with a 4 at least, Matthew, and not Madison cannot say that over these past 2 seasons. So, look, I think he's good. He's a very good quality running back. I mean, my God, he's been hurdling guys ever since his Boise State days, like maybe one of the best guys in the league at that. But looking at it now, man, you just start going down the list, and Dalvin already, even before this stuff was kind of coming up, wasn't someone we were necessarily locking in the top 12, because one of the things O'Connell brought over last year was that McVay just experience of we're not going to throw the ball to these running backs. Last year, the Vikings ranked 27th in targets to running backs, and the Rams ranked 32nd. So with Madison, again, assuming Dalvin Cook is indeed out of there, I think he falls right into that low-end RB2 range. If you want to put him, ahead of someone like J.K. Dobbins and Kenneth Walker, I probably wouldn't. I put him right behind there. I'd say right now, gun to my head, RB19, just ahead of guys like Cam Akers, James Conner, Dameon Pierce. So I don't really think he's necessarily going to get that full-time workhorse 3-down role. And if he does, as we just talked about, look, this offense, they're going to be throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson, to Jordan Addison, to TJ Hawkinson. I think Madison's going to be the 4th or 5th pass game option. So one thing we briefly talked about before the show, you brought up Ty Chandler might actually be the guy to get at cost. And I'll tell you what, man, when you get into these underdog best ball drafts where you got 18 rounds to get through, man, once you get past those top 150 pickings really start to get slim. We've been drafting Browns backup Jerome Ford for weeks now. He's finally starting to go up. Tajay Spears. There's a few guys out there. Ty Chandler, though, still regularly available in round 18. And I think once we probably get into training camp and find out that he is the number 2 guy behind Madison, that's when we can really get behind that value.
Yeah, and that's what I think is really difficult for us to figure out at this moment until we get to training camp, but also a challenge for folks like yourself who are getting rolling in the fantasy world in the middle of the summer is could Ty Chandler end up being a steal? Because, I think last year during preseason and training camp, we saw him emerge as somebody who I would call intriguing. He only carried the ball 15 times in preseason. So let's not go crazy, but those 15 were very impressive. I mean, he showed really unique bursts, and he's a little bit more experienced coming out of college. I think he was 23 or 24 when he came out of college. So more of a kind of ready to go type of guy. But as you know well, nobody else gets the football if Dalvin Cook is there, and then no one else is getting opportunities. Chandler also got hurt. I think it was on special teams. He got injured, so he wasn't getting any chance anyway to get a rotational spot. But he's a guy that when you see him in OTAs, he's getting a lot of work mixing in with Alexander Mattison, and he's got some jolt to him. And I think that what could end up playing out is that they want to go with the guy that they trust. And you know this, I'm sure you deal with this all the time. A team likes somebody with pass blocking ability more than they like the faster guy. It happens all the time. But in this case, if Ty Chandler can get to a baseline of those other things, the route combinations that he's got to be a part of and the pass blocking scheme that he has to be a part of, he's just got more quickness than Alexander Mattison and more home run ability. So I think that possibility is there that he could end up being more 50-50 or even throughout the season end up taking the majority of the carries, because even though I think Mattison is a very good player, there isn't any real home run ability, which I think is why his yards per carry is always just kind of meh.
And he has had like a good success rate. Like you kind of look at, like his PFF rushing grade, and that's a little bit better than kind of what you're seeing with the raw yards per carry. So not trying to say Madison's terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but again, I think when, at least in the fantasy world, like he is, again, I listed those finishes, like consistent RB1 stuff, just a little bit more backed by that volume, not every down workhorse role that I'm not quite as convinced is going to be there. It'll just be interesting though, man, because again, for this to be, and this was something that ever since Madison got all the guaranteed money, in free agency, we were like, okay, wow, this could be the time for Dalvin Cook to be out. And through that whole process, for no other meaningful additions to be made. I mean, for Ty Chandler to be the leader in the clubhouse as a 5th-round pick from last year, and now Dwayne McBride, a 7th-round pick this year. I guess that was the only thing that kind of caught me by surprise, because the two situations where we did think the veterans could be leaving, Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon and Cincy, neither team really went all that far out of their way to go ahead and actually add more bodies to this room after now going to be losing their starting running back. So, hey, Madison, Chandler, Kene, McBride. Yeah, okay, that can make it work. But just objectively speaking, Matthew, like that's probably a bottom 5 running back room in the entire NFL. Now, if you're going to have a position be a bottom 5 group in the NFL, I think we can agree it's probably the running back room out of all of them. So from that standpoint, I mean, go ahead, I guess. But yeah, not so sure we should be fully drinking the Kool-Aid if Madison's going to be, flying up those draft boards. So again, low end RB2 going around some of these other guys. I don't think it's terrible. But when it comes down to it in draft land, man, spending a 5th-round pick on him or getting one of these baller wide receivers or tight ends, probably won't be getting a ton of Madison once this goes through and that price gets even steeper.
Well, and that's what makes me wonder the fact that they didn't really add anybody else outside of drafting Dwayne McBride. That makes me wonder how they feel about Ty Chandler, because clearly they can trust Alexander Mattison. He knows the offense. He knows where he's got to be. And I think that you talk about catching the ball. I think he's a better catcher of the football than Dalvin Cook, where it was always talked about. And again, I'm sure you've paid attention to this. Always talked about, well, he's in the slot in OTAs. He's going to play.
He even tweeted he tweeted the video of himself making a catch against Pittsburgh last year.
Yes. And, I always thought maybe they should have done a little more of stuff like that, but I was never buying that he was suddenly going to become something. He wasn't. He was a true running back. And I think that Madison can be more of a threat because he actually has really great hands. But, I also think that there's a chance here for Chandler to step up. I guess I was wondering from your perspective, as you analyze something like this with someone that has no sample size. And last year there was the same argument for Kene Nwangwu, like maybe he's going to make some noise here. Maybe he's going to be a rotational player, and it just never came to fruition. I guess I just wonder how you deal with those players where you can talk yourself into it, but you really don't have a sample size to say whether it could be the case or not.
Comes down to the opportunity cost, and some of the guys that he is going around that, again, I mentioned where he's probably going to be. They have similar issues right now. Cam Akers, someone in Los Angeles that we have seen get that stretch for certain portions, and then all of a sudden week 1 comes around and he's in Sean McVay's doghouse. James Conner, brand new coaching staff. He's getting a little bit long in the tooth. Damian Pierce, brand new coaching staff. Miles Sanders is leaving for a Carolina team that we're not sure what his role is going to be. Montgomery is leaving for a new team. Rashad White, are they going to add someone there? So a lot of questions with that general range of running backs. And that's why in fantasy land, a lot of these times right now, we've seen wide receivers and even some of those high-end quarterbacks being pushed up higher than ever, because really after you get past the first 12, 13 running backs or so, you just start having these questions with a lot of the guys. In the year 2023, there are only so many offenses left that are going to use 1, even 2 running backs full time. More and more going to 3 and 4. And when you don't have a great offense to back that up, really tough to use top tier draft capital. So one of those things where, every situation is different. I try to treat it accordingly. I do think using some of, the coaching history, it has been an advantage, especially for guys like O'Connell, who, my God, man, having the McVay, the Shanahan, and the LaFleur coaching trees, like these head coaches that call plays and then their offensive coordinators get these jobs elsewhere. It's always a struggle to try to figure out how much did that OC actually have to say in the offense and how much was that just the head football coach doing it. So I think using, again, not anticipating the Vikings to be, the Los Angeles Vikings necessarily, but using things like the running back involvement in the passing game. Last year when Nathaniel Hackett went to Denver, I was a little bit worried about Albert O just getting the freaking full-time tight end role when we saw in Green Bay, Robert Tonyan scores 12 touchdowns and he still can't get a full-time role. So little things like that from one coaching staff to another, I think has helped with some of the unknown situations. And then it's just, I think, looking at guys smarter than myself at, real football evaluation. I usually lean on the Athletics, Dane Brugler for that. You guys can still read his beast. I mean, I go back years and just, some of these guys who maybe haven't gotten a chance to play. Kyle Trask, for example, I went back and pulled his up. Dane Brugler compared him to a carbon copy of Mason Rudolph. And I said, great, I am done here with this. So just, again, trying to lean on that because a lot of these guys too, even the AJ Dillons of the world who Kenneth Walker's too. You look at their collegiate stats and they have, so few receptions. And it's like, oh, okay, this can't be a pass catcher. And it's like, okay, can they not catch the football? Or are they from some college offense that just had no interest in throwing the football to them in the first place? So, there's only one or two Ronald Joneses out there who I think like physically are truly terrible receivers and catchers of the football. More times than not, you got this absolutely freak athlete running back. I'm not saying they can all be Austin Eckler or McCaffrey working downfield, but you throw them a couple swings, throw them a couple checkdowns. I'm pretty confident in them. So yeah, man, wide open situation. Definitely going to be listening to you and the rest of the Vikings beat, trying to see how this is going to evolve here as the summer months wind on.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually the Vikings thinking what you just laid out in drafting Dwayne McBride, where they looked at his receptions in college and said, I mean, it might just be their scheme that they never really throw the ball to the running back, because most of the time the running back is just catching a pass that is floated to him that anybody could catch except for us, right? So, yeah, that's an interesting element of that. And I do think that this Vikings offense, and this is where, well, actually, let me ask you first about Dalvin Cook, though, because I don't want to just say like, RIP Dalvin Cook, we'll see you later. Let's never talk about him again. I do want to know from you, though, and I think this has been part of the holdup, is where he would fit around the league. Because when I look through a lot of teams, and I know there's Miami buzz, and then the Jets got brought up, and there's kind of a bunch of teams that are being named now as maybe the Vikings are like, come on, doesn't somebody want him? Doesn't somebody want to trade us a draft pick? But it is not easy to look around the NFL and find a place for a bell cow running back. I think that I was having a conversation with a Jets person yesterday about just like, if you went to the Jets, are you going to give him like 150 carries and mix the carries with your other running backs? And then when Breece Hall comes back, Dalvin Cook just doesn't play. Like, how are you handling that? But almost every running back situation has those same challenges where they already have a guy who's slated to get the majority of carries.
Yeah, and the other side of it is like a lot of these teams are in a similar situation as the Vikings, where it's not that they couldn't use Dalvin Cook. Look, I think Dalvin Cook would help all 32 running back rooms in the NFL. Like, the guy is not completely washed. If he is, like, all right, a washed version of Dalvin Cook can still almost go for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, like without terrible efficiency. So I don't think he's, completely done by any stretch of the imagination. Allegedly, he even got the shoulder issue finally fixed up this offseason. So I just think overall, when you look at it, teams like the Buccaneers, the Rams, I think the Broncos, depending on how Javante's feeling, maybe the Bills, get the James Cook, Dalvin Cook, get the reunion going. By the way, James Dalvin Cook and Dalvin James Cook, love that freaking fun fact we got going on there. But those teams, I think, are similar situation where they probably don't have the money to splurge on Dalvin unless he's going to just take a big time cap or big time salary hit, whatever the hell he can do to change that up. Three teams I do think make sense and they have the money: Dolphins, Cowboys, and the Chargers. And the Dolphins, I know that's been the team consistently floated. Yeah, they drafted Devin Achane in the third round, but my God, man, I want him to work out too. I love speed as much as the next guy, but up to 192 pounds this offseason, just not so sure he can handle that. With the Cowboys replacing Zeke Elliott, we have heard a little bit of murmurs about him potentially coming back. But even then, man, Tony Pollard just got the franchise tag. He's not going to be coming off the field. Even the Los Angeles Chargers, like, that's more of a situation where Austin Eckler's even been on record himself. He doesn't want to be a workhorse running back getting 200, 250 carries per year. He's very happy working in a committee and more so focusing on the passing game. But to your point in Fantasyland, man, I wrote this on fantasylife.com. You guys can check it out over there. Always free. Gotta love that. But with the Dolphins, I think if he goes there, probably ends up being pretty close to Alexander Madison, honestly. I have him projected as the RB19 right there in that same group of guys. But if not the Dolphins, man, Cowboys, I have him RB29, Chargers, RB32. That's not going to be super pretty. And he still is going right now with all this uncertainty. And if you guys are crazy enough like me to be drafting here in lovely June, you are seeing him going right around this top 20 RBs. So similar to DeAndre Hopkins, I think we might be kind of underestimating how low things could get excuse me, for Dalvin Cook. I mean, just with these running backs, man, they fall off a cliff in a hurry. I'm not saying Dalvin necessarily fell off a cliff, but to your original point, finding a new employer that's going to treat him like prime Dalvin and giving him those 300 touches, I don't think they're out there. So again, if he can find a way to shrink that salary cap number down, the Vikings take a certain amount of it, then okay, that could open things up. I think the Buccaneers and the Rams in particular would be the two spots where maybe we could see that big of a role come to fruition, but doesn't seem like that's on the verge of happening, man.
Yeah, I know. And that's why we've been waiting for something to happen for a long time. And I think that even if you're the Vikings, it's weird because you probably want to get this resolved and not have it just floating over your head. At the same time, the best way to do it might be just to wait until training camp and somebody gets hurt, because it always happens. The first 3 days of training camp, somebody gets injured and then someone's desperate for a running back. But I guess if you're Dalvin, maybe you're hoping that they cut you, but then that's a pay cut for you. So yeah, I don't know.
They could have.
It's tricky.
I guess, Matthew, with that thing, like the Cowboys designated Zeke as a post-June 1st cut, and they cut him in March. Like that was what the big issue with this thing, too. The trade part of it makes sense. I understand you, or maybe you can do the trade in, March and then say it was a post-June 1st. These freaking salary caps, shit, man. But that was the other confusing part with me because, yeah, I'm with you, but we also have Fournette, Hunt, Zeke, and probably another couple guys that are waiting for that exact same thing. So I would put Dalvin ahead of all those guys. Don't get me wrong, but maybe there's another team out there that thinks differently. So yeah, not the most ideal situation for Dalvin. It seems like they've been trying to work with him to find the right trade partner. So I'm not accusing the Vikings of screwing him over or anything like that, but just hasn't exactly worked out for either side so far, unfortunately.
The challenges of being a running back in the NFL just never end. So let's talk about Jordan Addison, because we are having debates already on the sideline between beat reporters over whether KJ Osborne or Jordan Addison will end up with more receptions for this year. Now, I have made the case for KJ Osborne here because it is a complicated offense for wide receivers. Wes Phillips, their offensive coordinator, explained this yesterday. Receivers have to line up all over the field. There's a lot of reads you have to make. There's a lot of changes. A lot of things have to be done on the fly. That's not to say that Jordan Addison can't do that. He lined up in a lot of places in college, but right away, that might be a little more tricky to earn the trust of Kirk Cousins in the same way that KJ Osborne has. There's also, and I don't want to say that he's going to be injury prone or anything like that. I'm not saying that. And you hate that. I know you hate that from the fantasy perspective of the injury prone. But Jordan Addison was banged up a little in college, banged up a little at the combine, banged up a little here in OTAs. And I just wonder about his first full season. That is so hard for rookies to go through the whole college process, combine, everything else, and then, step into the NFL and have that 17-game season where KJ Osborne has been a professional for years. And I know that Kirk Cousins really likes him. That's my case. But everyone I see from fantasy is saying that Jordan Addison is this tremendous pick that everyone should be making. So maybe I'm completely wrong. How do you see this?
Where he's going right now in drafts, I think is reasonable. He's kind of stuck in that mid-tier wide receiver 3 range, next to guys like a Treylon Burks, like a Kadarius Toney, Jackson Smith, and the Jigba at this point is only going a few picks ahead of him. So those guys do have similar questions going on, but especially, man, the early season, I think you're right to have some concerns about him immediately working over KJ Osborne. I mean, we all laugh about all the reports that came out. Oh, Justin Jefferson working behind Olabisi Johnson to start, his rookie year. Oh my God, how ridiculous. That happened only for 2 weeks. But that did happen. Justin Jefferson played fewer snaps than Olabisi Johnson. The week before, he had that breakout game against the Titans where, he's gritting across the freaking goal line for his first career touchdown. So, it is one of these situations where we saw last year. I mean, just the rookie wide receiver breakouts sometimes wait until, you need to wait a good half of the season for them to really come to fruition. And I have done studies showing that on average, these rookie wide receivers are scoring more points in the second half of the year versus the first half. Now, in fantasy, that's fine because, we're trying to ultimately optimize things for weeks 15 to 17, for those fantasy playoffs. But no, I think it could be a bit of an issue early on. I will say KJ Osborne, the concern, I guess, that I would have is just that really he's been there. He's been out there in 3 wide receiver sets. We've had occasional flashes. I mean, that Colts comeback last year was probably his best game ever, but looking at him since he's come into the league, 97th among 110 qualified wide receivers in yards per out run, 104th in targets per out run. Those are the 2 metrics that tend to be stickiest when, looking at guys really taking that step forward. The guys that when they're out there on the field running routes, they've been able to demand targets. They've been able to make good uses of them. I understand you're sharing an offense with Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, who even if he wasn't completely killing it in the, really just last year, I mean, I wouldn't say, even 2 years before that, he was scoring 10 plus touchdowns. So not trying trying to, dismiss what he was even doing later in his career, but there wasn't much to go around there. But then you add a first round wide receiver into the group. I tend to think Addison is going to be that guy sooner rather than later. I guess the one argument would be like, who do you think is going to be ultimately featured in the 2 wide receiver sets, or will it matter? Because looking at last year, man, Adam Thielen, second in total routes last season, only behind Justin Jefferson. So I think it's going to be Addison and Jefferson before too long. But if they do just say Osborn's our number 2, Addison, you are not big enough to be on the outside, we're going to stick you in the slot. I know he's had experience playing both, but maybe at the NFL level, that's what they decide. That's how I see it going wrong, man. So do you think, again, this Osborn issue? Because to be fair, Osborn is much more established than Olabisi Johnson, I think, ever was in this offense. So I think there's something there, man. But again, not the opportunity cost in that mid wide receiver 3 range. I do get the upside.
Yeah, the BC Johnson and Justin Jefferson situation was a little bit weird because Jefferson had gotten COVID in 2020, and there was that truncated training camp. So there was only like 2 or 3 weeks of training camp, and Jefferson, they just didn't feel like was ready with the complete offense yet. And then after they lost the first 2 games and the offense was horrendous, they decided it's just time.
Speed this up.
Yeah, it's just time. And then he put on one of the most incredible performances I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, I mean, but it does happen just in general because it's who the not only the coaching staff is going to trust, but also who the quarterback is going to trust. And throughout the years, Kirk Cousins has repeatedly talked about KJ Osborn as a guy that he's got a lot of trust with. This is what I'm thinking to sort of make the argument. I don't know if it's going to be really the case or not. I just know how tricky it was last year for even Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen to learn this offense. And even the first couple of weeks of the season, they were looking at Kirk like, was I supposed to go there? And these are the best receivers in the world. So I think that the challenge is there for that to happen. And I think it's also very difficult. And I'm curious about kind of your thought about the whole group, like TJ Hawkinson included. I think it's difficult for anybody around someone like Justin Jefferson because every single play is designed to go to Justin Jefferson. And I don't blame anybody for that. Everybody else is just, I was talking to Keenan McCardle, the receivers coach, and he's like, I tell everybody, you got to be open on tape because you might not be getting the football, but you got to be ready if it comes your way. But also there is the element of after Jefferson annihilated the entire universe last year, everybody is designing their defense to face Justin Jefferson this year. So I don't know how you weigh all these factors when you're looking at Osborn, Addison, and Hawkinson, who are all, we'll see on Addison, but all thought to be very capable pass catchers.
And that's the thing where the one guy out of that group I've been drafting less and less is TJ Hawkinson. I think those numbers last year were a bit too lofty to expect to come to fruition again. Hats off to the guy, though. I mean, with Chase Claypool going the Bears and like a month and a half later, they were like, he still doesn't know the offense well enough to get out there. Hawkinson played like 90% of the snaps, like his very first week in Minnesota, caught 9 passes for 70 yards. So he crushed it, and I get the talent and everything. But if you just look at his pace, and he played 10 games there, I believe, including the wild card game, 163 target pace in terms of a 17-game season if you extrapolate that out. So don't quite think he's going to get there. I mean, that is like what we hope that Kelsey and Andrews and these guys can even get to. And guess what? That's fine. If Hawkinson only gets 120 targets, he's still going to have a very good chance at, leaping into the position's top 3, if not top 5. So nothing against Hawkinson in particular, but again, it's more so like when I'm drafting, like what can I get now that I can't get later? And with Hawkinson right now being anointed as this usually number 3 tight end on the board behind only Kelsey and Andrews, like I don't see that much of a reason to draft Hawkinson. Literally, like sometimes 4 to 5 rounds ahead of someone like Darren Waller, and you got Dallas Goedert and George Kittle going later. So Hawkinson is the one that I think is probably being priced up a little too much because there only is one football to go around in this offense. And even if Addison, maybe the expectations are a little high, which I think they do tend to be for most rookies because we spend freaking February through April every year gushing over all these guys before they played a single NFL snap. I would say Hawkinson could be the odd man out there, but no, it's a good point with the Osborn situation. I know we tend to write guys like KJ Osborn off because they haven't been, super elite during their time. And then you see the flashy rookie come in, but at least in September, man, it's going to be one of those situations where, look, I'm probably not going to move Addison down that much further than I have him. I think he is a solid wide receiver 3 at this point in time, but in September, start sit questions week 1, week 2, like anything close, I'm going to be taking the other guy. I'm happy to be a week late on Addison, but once it's here, man, I think it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, I think that this whole group is got kind of a lot of intrigue of, I mean, that we haven't really seen in the past. It's almost been very easy to go like, are they just going to do the same things they did before? And the answer is usually yes. Which brings us to, of course, Kirk Cousins, who you shouted out from the
Yeah.
beginning of the show. There is no more projectable quarterback or predictable quarterback with Kirk Cousins. And even if you just factor, well, if they throw more passes, his efficiency will go down and his turnovers will go up and so forth, which always happens. But if you run the bootlegs and try to run the ball all the time, then his efficiency will go up, but his totals will go down. I mean, it's you can always turn the sliders with him a little bit. But there is one thing I wanted to ask you about. We talk about age curves with running backs all the time. But
Mhm.
something that I was looking at before last year and then going into this year with Kirk Cousins is just that there are GOAT quarterbacks who have gone into their late 30s and 40s and have just continued to be who they are. There are not a lot of other quarterbacks who have done that. The quarterbacks who you would compare historically to Kirk Cousins in their mid 30s started to hit a wall. I don't know if that's going to happen. He looks totally fine in OTAs. He kind of always looks like Kirk. And I don't think athleticism has ever been how he's gotten where he is. It's been mostly technique and throwing accuracy and stuff like that, which doesn't fade as fast. But I am interested in that fantasy angle of do you factor age into the quarterback conversation? Because I do think his starts to come into play in the mid 30s.
Hey man, he did have those like 13 rushing touchdowns with Washington back in the day. You can scoot a little bit pre-Minnesota, but I know what you're saying, 100%. With quarterback, man, like your intuition's spot on though. This is one thing I usually look at, February and March, the real dog days of the calendar, especially when dynasty is in the air in fantasy land. But looking at quarterbacks, or any position, I guess 35 years or older by the time the season's going to be done with. Every single, top 12 fantasy performer over the past 10 years, 18% of the quarterbacks have been age 35 or older. That's actually the highest, individual age bracket of, the quarterback position. 0% running backs, 0% wide receivers, 3% tight ends. So tight end and quarterback are the only ones you can kind of see these guys get up there a little bit in age and still continue to put forward the great performances. Now, when I've done this, a lot of people are like, oh, that's just Tom Brady right there. Like, that's probably the only guy it is. Yes, Brady is accounting for, a bit of that. He had 6 top 12 finishes after, reaching the age of 35. But Drew Brees also had 6. Aaron Rodgers had 3. Peyton Manning had 2. Ben Roethlisberger had 2. All those guys are objectively a bit better than Kirk Cousins, and that's the problem here. I would not exactly going to put him in that, range of things. But with Kirk, man, I do think that he a bit unfairly, like, he's been a lot better than guys like Derek Carr, a lot better than guys like Jared Goff. And you don't have to dig that deep into the advanced metrics to see that. I think because he hasn't had the team-wide success, he's still viewed more as an equal with those guys. But I'm happy to prioritize him in that group. I mean, right now I have Kirk as my quarterback 16, which I know he just finished as a QB 12, 3 straight years, but I have him ahead of guys like Jared Goff, like Russell Wilson, like Derek Carr, like Matthew Stafford. And I'm not against taking Kirk Cousins because I think in general, that tier of quarterbacks, when you're not getting the rushing upside attached to them, that's where we really struggle in fantasy land to properly designate these guys, like where they're going. Because when we see Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, it's not that hard to wrap your mind around. Okay, this guy could run for 800 plus yards and he's also going to throw the football a lot. That makes sense. And historically, when you look at the top 6 QBs in preseason ADP, they finish as top 6 QBs at a way higher rate than we see the back half of the QBs. That's where guys like Geno Smith, like Jared Goff can come a bit out of nowhere. So my advice would just be, look, with Kirk Cousins, he's going to be someone that's going to be ranked right around that QB1 borderline every single week next year. And that is valuable. I wouldn't exactly go out of my way to reach on him, though, because as much as Kirk Cousins is someone that we can rank there, man, when we start looking at a Matthew Stafford, even guys like Kenny Pickett or Jordan Love, like, I just don't think the difference between 2 pocket passers is worth legit sometimes 5, 6 rounds of difference in a fantasy draft. So Kirk, I think he's appropriately priced, kind of on that QB1 borderline, forever going to be someone we're going to want a little bit more out of. But at the same time, we're going to be impressed when we look at the advanced stats. Don't think he's someone you need to go out of your way for, especially just in your traditional 1 QB leagues. Usually what I've been doing, and best ball is a little bit different strategy because you draft and then you don't have a chance for waivers or anything like that. So you have to draft several QBs. I've kind of been letting my early picks decide what QBs I'm going to get. So if I'm getting the 101, we got Justin Jefferson, I scoop up Hawkinson or Addison later. later, yeah, let's build a Viking stack at that point. Not someone where I'm just stopping everything I'm doing though in round 9 going, you know who would really take this team over the top? Captain Kirk.
Well, and I think that the way that Kevin O'Connell played last year was very much to lean into the passing game. And part of that was also circumstances. They played in a ton of close games where you have to keep passing. So it's not like you're up by 20 points. This year, the defense is probably not going to be all that great. And it's going to have its issues. It might improve from where it was last year, but based on their schedule, that's not going to be very easy. So there's going to be a ton of opportunity for him to throw the ball. It's just that I wonder about if those efficiency numbers, the QBRs, the quarterback rating from last year, even the PFF grade, these things all kind of drifted backwards. And if you go through a lot of similar quarterbacks in history to him, you're always going to find that year where he goes into the year and everyone's like, oh, it's all good. And then just what happened? It wasn't as good anymore because, age just kind of comes for everybody. And I'm not like trying to predict that. I'm just saying that all of a sudden becomes much more possible at this point in someone's career.
Bro, last year we had Reggie Wayne throwing up because of how much Matt Ryan reminded him of Peyton Manning. Like, how is he still throwing up? You still throwing up out there, Reggie? So, no, I mean, it's very possible. And, one of the things I brought at the beginning of this was the top 10 scoring offenses. And I went back and looked at, how sticky is that? How often do top 10 offenses 1 year repeat the feat the next year? It gets cut in half, man. Median and average since 2000. Only an average of, I think, 4.8 teams actually do repeat that. So Chiefs, Eagles, Cowboys, Bills, Lions, 49ers, Vikings, Bengals, Seahawks, and Jaguars. Those are top 10 offenses from last season. History tells us 5 of them are going to be on the outside looking in. So not saying the Vikings are going to fall to 30th or anything like that. They could be the 11th or 12th ranked offense and still be perfectly fine for real life purposes. But no, it's a good point about just not continuously assuming, again, guys like Cousins, guys that don't have the rushing out, these older quarterbacks that need to be super efficient as passers to even have a chance of, flirting with fantasy upside. Those are the guys more times than not fading again, unless it goes into a stack. Because if you do want to try to find, okay, who can I get that is like Jalen Hurts or Madden Coverboy, as it just came out, Josh Allen coming out here. Where can I get, archetypes of those guys for cheaper in the later rounds? Anthony Richardson, the Colts' new QB1, he fits that criteria. Vanilla Vic, Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones last season averaged more fantasy points per game than Trevor Lawrence. And I know we can say that's everything that's wrong with fantasy football. And if that's your take, I'm not even calling you an idiot, but it's the game we play. And that sweet, sweet rushing upside is going to change the position. And honestly, it's gross. It feels weird, but Kyler Murray's probably the other one. Everyone just writing off this year. And you have a quarterback who's essentially free now at the back end of drafts that we have seen at his best put forward top 5, if not top 3 numbers. So again, with Kirk Cousins and stuff, I think that's a situation where you can say, where can I find him later? I mean, Ryan Tannehill's free because of the Jimmy Garoppolo foot injury. People are freaking out about that. Brock Purdy's there. You can even talk about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud type guys. I take Cousins over all of them, but it's not just about that. It's like, do I want Cousins in round 10 or do I want, again, Ryan Tannehill literally round 18? I've kind of had this, more of a first or last approach, unless I'm getting a Richardson type that I think could this time next year be in that first group.
So I wrote down some random players around the league to wrap up with that I wanted your quick 1-second hot take on. And actually, Anthony Richardson was one of them because I think that's a very hard one to predict. But even though he's talked about as a quarterback who should sit for a year and so forth, they're not going to play Gardner Minshew there. They're playing Anthony Richardson. And I've seen fantasy people have him fairly high because the rushing upside. So give me your elevator pitch for why Anthony Richardson should be a higher pick.
13 of 14 quarterbacks with 125 plus carries in a season have posted top 12 fantasy numbers per game. So I'm not just rewarding guys that played 17 games and they get to finish because you get to add up their points versus guys with 13 points. The only one that didn't was 2020 Cam Newton with the Patriots because he still scored 13 rushing touchdowns, just couldn't quite crack the top 12. So honestly, just receiving running backs and rushing quarterbacks, those are the 2 cheat codes we have in this game. And Anthony Richardson just broke the combine as the most athletic QB ever. So maybe Minshew gets the start of the season. I tweeted after Richardson got drafted that I will eat a tweet. So I got to get a printer ready, I guess, and do that if Richardson is not the week 1 starter, because just in history, man, it happens every now and then. But I calculated earlier. Yeah, it's since 2010, the only quarterbacks that were drafted in the top 10 to not start at least 10 games as a rookie: Tua, who got to 9 and was kind of hurt; Jared Goff, blame Jeff Fisher; Trey Lance, interesting situation; Mahomes. Like Alex Smith had them racking up division titles and was played like an MVP that year. And the only guy who had not started a single game was Jake Locker with 0. So unless you think Richardson's Jake Locker, and I do think some actually comped him to that coming out, I would not. I think he's going to be starting 10 plus games easy. I was still expecting to be out there in week 1. And he's just going to be like, we'll see if he gets to later career of Josh Allen, but before Josh Allen became a world beater in real life, he was still a great fantasy QB. I think that's what Richardson will be in 2023.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the best case scenario, is that he has that progression where he's still a great runner right away, and then it gets better and better year over year with the passing.
How about same thing?
Right. Yeah. Well, and we'll see where that goes from there. Yeah. But from a fantasy perspective, yes, Fields was still good last year. Kenny Pickett and George Pickens both intrigue me because I don't know what to think of Kenny Pickett yet. I was impressed in a couple of games toward the end of the season, and I really like what I saw from some highlight catches from George Pickens, but I don't know about the bigger sample on him either. What is your view on two guys there that are supposed to take huge jumps in Pittsburgh?
Pickett had this thing where I think won like 6 of his last 8 starts. I think one of those games he even got knocked out in. So you'd hear good things at the end, but like he's winning these games like 13-9 with like a great game-winning drive there at the end. So, hey, clutch factor, all that, sure, go ahead. But in terms of the fantasy points that are being put forward, just weren't there. Here are the only rookie quarterbacks that started at least 10 games and did not throw for even 10 touchdowns since 2000. David Carr, Kyle Orton, Bruce Gronkowski, Jimmy Clausen, Mitch Trubisky, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and Kenny Pickett. So not a great group to be in. And I don't think we can look back at that Steelers team and, have the usual argument where it's like, oh, look who he was throwing to. Nobody. I don't know. He had Pickens out there making a sick one-handed catch every week. Deontay Johnson has put forward big seasons before. Pat Freiermuth, not going to say Najee Harris, but you guys could imagine. So with that situation with Pickett, again, he's so cheap at the end of drafts. I don't hate it if I already do have some Steelers out there because he would hardly be the first quarterback to make a nice leap from year 1 to year 2. My God, Trevor Lawrence's numbers, Jared Goff's numbers, like we've seen it, but also wasn't a number 1 overall pick like those guys. I would say, 9, I'd say like 7 times out of 10, I don't think Pickett is going to be working out. In terms of Pickens, I'm finally getting back into it. It was the weirdest thing, man, starting off this offseason. Only very recently did Deontay Johnson actually get moved ahead of Pickens, and people were drafting him ahead because, again, the whole argument last year, Tua versus Herbert, and Herbert's a social media QB, whatever idiot said that. But, like, Pickens is a social media wide receiver if we've ever seen one because he's just making these acrobatic catches, shoving cornerbacks down off the line of scrimmage. I love it, and I do think he's perhaps being a little bit unfairly penalized because Pittsburgh only asked him to run goes half the time, so he's not even getting a chance to run a more nuanced route tree. But ultimately, man, you can't do much with the football if it's not being thrown to you. Rocket science right there. And in those about roughly 11 games that Pickett was under center, Deontay Johnson had 92 targets, and second place was Freiermuth with 67, and in third was Pickens with 58. So only one football to go around. I trust Deontay more so as a target earner. As Pickens' ADP goes down, I'm fine. Don't hate the player, hate the ADP. But right now, I would say with both of those guys, going to be a bit rough. The 2 Steelers I've been drafting, man, Deontay Johnson and their handcuff, Jaylen Warren. Otherwise, man.
Kenny Pickett, when he was in college and coming out of the draft,
slide, that fucker.
I said he kind of reminds me a little bit of Teddy Bridgewater. And actually last year, he reminded me a lot of Teddy Bridgewater.
I like that.
Not putting up big stats, but kind of coming through and not turning the ball over enough to help your defense and so forth. But I don't know if the ceiling is any higher either. The last one I have is Jordan Love, because that I think is the hardest thing to predict in Vikings land, is looking around the division and saying, well, I think we know that the Lions are going to be a good team. The Bears, I don't think are quite there yet unless Justin Fields takes that Josh Allen leap. Jordan Love, I just have no idea what to think. So how are you projecting Jordan Love?
I have him ranked right next to Pickett because it's just, again, we have these quarterbacks who are not going to be given. They can both move a little bit, as much as I, as a former linebacker, hate the Pickett fake slide. It was cool. Like, I'll give him that, I guess. And, he got it outlawed. Jordan Love can move around a little bit. And we've seen that, in his brief times under center, but we're not going to be getting this Justin Fields, 1,000+ yard season out of nowhere. So At the end of the day, they're two quarterbacks that we fully expect to start 17 games. Like there's going to be no quarterback controversy in either of those situations. So just from that perspective, man, like when you're getting into round 15, 16 of these drafts, like you're looking at a quarterback that will probably start 17 games versus just a bunch of backups at running back and maybe clear-cut number 3 wide receivers out there as well. So it just comes down to what kind of roster construction you're working with. If you need a second quarterback in terms of, I think most people out there listening, just doing a traditional one quarterback league with your friends. No, you're not touching either of these guys unless you want to go ahead and, try to find a way to stream them later. And guess what? If they do impress early on, they'll be there on your waiver wire for you to go ahead and get them. So not out on Jordan Love or Pickett because we just really haven't seen enough to have this super opinion on them one way or another. That's the whole thing that pisses me off about the Trey Lance debate, man. Like, okay, he hasn't done anything, but like that doesn't mean he couldn't in the future. How could you make any sort of, conclusion about him when we've, barely seen the guy? So I just hope that when the Chiefs actually come to town here, the Packers give the Mahomes family a little bit of taste of their own medicine. Remember that first start? They put Love's family literally in the highest seat possible away from the field. That just, I can't get over that happening, man. They got to get him back here.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. Well, good thing they couldn't see what Jordan was doing because it wasn't that good in that game. But Ian, always great stuff. Always a really fun and interesting conversation with you. And I guess we'll see what happens with Jordan Love. But I think the ceiling probably like with Kenny Pickett is a little lower. But if he's okay, then they might be a decent team this year. It's just hard to say that he's going to be the next Rodgers, but Vikings fans certainly terrified of that. Fantasylife.com is the website. If you followed Matthew Berry for a long time, that's his project, and you're a major part of that. So I'm very happy for you in that. People should follow you, as 130,000 people do on Twitter. I was blown away when I looked at that. I mean, that is that you are a borderline influencer at 130K. But no, I Hartitz on Twitter if you're not already one of those people. So appreciate the time, man. Glad to do this summer get together with you again, and we'll do it again soon.
Appreciate you, brother. Go Vikings, everyone.